Just watch me now.
Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin for episode number 43. And today we have Derek Ryan on the program. Derek Ryan is currently a Calgary Flame. He's just completed his second season with the Flames. His story, if you aren't familiar with Derek, this is not the first time it's been told, but the hockey world, small as it is also big enough that sometimes guys with stories like these can be lost. And this is a story that needs to be heard because Derek goes back to the Spokane Chiefs, and that's where we have a common alliance. Being a Spokane Chief and coming from that area, one of the differences between Derek and I is that he was born in Spokane. So he was a Spokane local who grew up in the youth system there and kind of always aspired to be a Chief. And he was able to live that dream, but with that dream didn't come the promise of the NHL that he might have wanted. And the story here is about Derek leaving Spokane, an accomplished junior player for sure, but with no draft day story to tell and no free agent signing to tell at the NHL. And he was left to decide to go play Canadian university hockey when he was finished with the WHL. Most guys that decide to do that, I would say almost all, at 20 or 21 that go play at a university in Canada are not thinking they're going to end up in the NHL. However, Derek obviously did. He ended up playing 4 years in Edmonton. He ended up signing a pro deal in Austria, of all places. He ends up signing a deal in Sweden. He ends up signing his first NHL deal and attending his first NHL camp at 28 years old. So from never being drafted, never being recognized, never being offered an NHL deal, he gets a two-way NHL deal at 28, comes back over the pond, enters the AHL, and ends up working his way into a full-time NHL player in his 30s. This does not happen often. I don't want to pretend that anyone can do this. This is a rarity, but it is still a super cool story to chronicle and to tell, and to understand what it took for Derek to find his way to the NHL. And now with 300 games under his belt, like I said, an accomplished third-line player who's established himself as a trusted face-off man, a diverse player that can play up and down the lineup, and really has cemented himself as an NHLer. It's a fun one to tell. It was fun to be a part of, and just listening to all the things that made him the player that he was, or is, I should say, and is continuing to develop to become even better. And I think that's one of the morals of this story, as you will hear, is that when you stack a good day on top of a good day on top of a good day, and that turns into a season, which turns into 2 seasons, which turns into years, and you keep that type of focus and that type of intentionality on your game, while you're enjoying it. Obviously, we talk about passion there too, but you know what? Surprise, newsflash, you get better. And Derek kept getting better, and now here he is, NHL regular. And I can't wait for you to listen to this story. So without further ado, I bring you Derek Ryan. All right, here we are, episode 43 with Derek Ryan. Derek was gracious enough to say yes to this request over Instagram, even though we've never met, Derek. So thanks so much for doing that. I think I buttered you up a little bit with the fact that we both played for Spokane for so long. How could you say no to an ex-Chief, right? So anyways, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. Definitely the Spokane Chief alumni card helped you out a little bit there. That's the blood runs deep there for Spokane. I'm in Spokane now. It's my home base. I'll always live here. So you touched on a sensitive area there for sure. Smart play by you.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, which is interesting too, because I don't know how you have been with Spokane. Mind you, you are living in Spokane, and Spokane is home. So maybe you keep a little tight, your finger on the pulse of the team a little bit more than I do. But I mean, prior to arriving on the scene as a chief, I definitely knew those guys that came before me, right? Especially like right before me, like the Falloons and the Junkers and the Whitneys and Trevor Kidd, and you mean all these guys that were there. So I had my eyes on them, and I had a little bit of understanding of the history there. But then once you leave, like I kind of, I knew they went to the Memorial Cup, and I went back there for that the one year and all that stuff, and that was great. But then the farther removed you get, the farther, the more distance there is. So I have to be honest, when I heard your story from somebody that lives in Spokane, says, you know what, you got to talk to Derek. And I looked and I'm like, oh my God, like he's on that, your name's on that top 30 Chiefs list. And I was like, how cool is this? So maybe we should start there. Like how was your experience in Spokane, and how did you end up, putting on the Chief jersey?
Yeah, I guess an interesting story there. I've told it a few times, but I'll talk about it a little bit more. Obviously, born and raised in Spokane, grew up playing Spokane Amateur Youth Hockey Association. Youth hockey in Spokane was big, I guess, a little bit, but not huge, and it still isn't huge, especially compared to, Canadian markets or whatnot. So, being raised in Spokane, you kind of idolize those Spokane Chiefs. That's basically like playing in the NHL to a youth hockey player in Spokane, is to being able to put on that Chiefs jersey. So, yeah, I can definitely relate to you and knowing the guys, especially as I got older, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, were those Chiefs guys like Brandon Cote, and even some of the guys that I played with, the Lynch brothers, Chad Clausen, all these guys that are pretty cool in my opinion at that time. Like these guys are basically the bee's knees when it comes to hockey players in Spokane. So I after my youth hockey journey in Spokane, I kind of made it to where most of the top end players in Spokane make it to, which is the Spokane Braves. That's a junior B team in the KIJHL, and like I just alluded to, most of the best players in Spokane eventually ended up playing for this organization. Was coached by a guy named Mike Bay. He was great, kind of old school, Mike Babcock, Bill Peters kind of mentality, which was probably a little bit grooming for me in my later career. Looking back, helped me to be a little more willing to accept some coaching like that. So did a great job of teaching me the ropes a little bit, showing me what it took to be a good junior player. And basically at that point, I was starting to have a lot of success at the junior B level, and my parents were pretty heavy on school for me, which I was too. School is always super important. It was important for me to get an education, and I kind of turned my back on the Chiefs a little bit at that point, just because I knew, or thought I knew, I wanted to go to school. And my last year at the Braves, I just had a ton of success. I remember Tim Speltz coming to games all the time. Al Conroy was the coach at the time. He was coming to games all the time. And it eventually just got to a point where, they offered me, I don't know if they can do this anymore, but at that time, they offered me a scholarship where if I signed with them, played with them, I'd automatically be guaranteed my 4 years of college for free. So at that point, you never know what can happen. Looking back, who knows what would happen if I went the other way, but it's pretty hard to turn down that opportunity to play in your hometown where, like I said before, I was idolizing these guys. This is like the NHL, and I get my schooling guaranteed. So, I mean, how does a guy turn that down? And if I do turn that down, try to go junior A and try to go the NCAA route, what happens if I get injured? What happens if I don't do well? And then all of a sudden I turned down that free schooling from the Western League. So
Right.
smarter heads prevailed in our household, and we made that decision to don the Chiefs sweater, and definitely not a decision that I regret at all. Pretty cool to be able to do that in your hometown. I was able to live at home, live with my mom and dad, and just have a great experience at home playing for a great organization.
Yeah, there's a storied franchise and one of the best in junior hockey for sure. You know, and you mentioned Tim Spelt's name there already. He was a fantastic manager. He was there through my time as well. Always brought in pretty quality people. You know, I think in the dressing room, that was character was always a pretty big highlight for them, and even the coaches that came through there. You know, people don't always agree with everything, but like, you know, Brian Maxwell was one of the best coaches I had, and we didn't see eye to eye all the time, but he was a heck of a teacher's coach. And then, you know, Mike Babcock came in there. We also know what happened with Babs and Bill Peters, and, you know, they always seem to bring in some pretty good, you know, I don't know what the right word is, teachers, educators, you know, to help groom these guys for a pro game. So I definitely have lots to be grateful for with my time in Spokane. You mentioned on your Braves coach, though, you said that he taught me what it took to be a good junior. What were some of those lessons that you remember from your time there playing with the Braves?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of piggyback off what you were talking about there before with Brian Maxwell, Babs, and Bill Peters, and my coach in junior B then, Mike Bay. I mean, these guys that are coaching at this level, they're more than just hockey teachers, right? They're teaching and helping to develop young men who are, you know, anywhere between 15 and 20 years old, which is a huge time in your life where you're trying to figure life out. You're playing in the Western Hockey League, so you're a bit glorified in certain cities. Spokane for sure, no different, where you're kind of put on a pedestal, and it's hard for some kids to handle that. I mean, it's a unique situation, and I think the coaches have a unique job in order to kind of groom these kids to, you know, not let their egos get too inflated, kind of keep them in reality, and also help them to progress in real life, whether it's taking their schooling seriously, if they're still in high school, or maybe taking a couple of college courses and they're 19 and 20 after their high school days, you know, helping them through these, helping them make real life decisions at this point in your life, which is pretty hard. So, yeah, some of the lessons that Mike was able to instill upon me was just coming to the rink every day, and making myself better. He taught me at a young age where I was probably one of the more talented guys on the team, which don't want to sound bragging. It's just Spokane, so it's not like I was a huge national commodity or anything like that. But he taught me to come to the rink, even though I was one of the more talented guys, and he taught me to come to the rink to work and to get better every single day. And I mean, that's a lesson that seems so simple, almost a little bit cliche, but at the same time, I couldn't tell you how many guys I've seen in my career, all the way from my Spokane Braves days to, you know, now playing in the NHL or playing in the American Hockey League. I've seen so many guys where they're a lot more talented than I am, where they're a lot more talented than a lot of guys are in the NHL, but they don't make it to the NHL because they don't have that work ethic and they don't have that mental strength that it takes to play day in and day out. And at the NHL level, I mean, it doesn't get any harder than that, where it's a grind of a season. It's 82 games. You're coming to the rink 6 or 7 times a week, 6 or 7 days a week, and you just have to have that mentality to come into the rink every day to get better and to not take days off. And like I said, I saw a lot of guys kind of fail at that, and I think that's the reason they never really made it to the highest level they could have.
That's a great lesson, and one that I can share my own perspective on, because I remember that as I came to be a pro, that was almost when I stopped thinking that I could develop more. And it wasn't a conscious thought. You know, it wasn't like, oh, I'm done, you know, but it was just like, because you're getting paid for it, right? Now it becomes a job. Now it's about wins and losses. And I kind of stopped thinking about personal development and what it took for me to get better and to improve. And in some aspects, I think I actually got worse. Whereas it sounds like your trajectory, you obviously kept getting better and you kept improving and you used that philosophy. So, yeah, I can relate to what you're saying there, you know, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't conscious, but it was like, you do need to have a personal philosophy built into you that you want to get better every day.
Well, it's just human nature, right? I mean, you make it to the pros and you're like, oh, well, I made it. Here I am, you know, whether you're in the NHL or the American Hockey League, you're still getting paid to play hockey, which is a pretty cool feeling no matter who you are. So it's just human nature to feel like, hey, here I am. I'm here for a reason. I'll just keep doing that.
What are some of the things, I do want to unpack a couple of the things you said there, but I think we'll just go with the getting better for now. So like if you could say in your own approach then, so now, you said you learned this as a junior and then you maybe as a chief and then maybe at U of A and then maybe at in Austria, like wherever this took you, what did that look like for you in your day? Were you a guy that showed up early for practice, left late? Were you always doing stuff away from the rink, or were you just trying to make the most of your time whenever you were on the ice or around the guys?
Yeah, I'm definitely a guy that shows up early, especially at the NHL level. There's some certain things that you can be doing. The workouts are usually, moderately optional, I guess. You can do them or you don't have to do them. And I'm a kind of guy that thinks I need to be doing that, especially at the NHL level where guys are just bigger, faster, and stronger than anywhere else. That's super important. But I think that it's kind of hard to really explain, but I think that it's really important for kids and guys, even at the professional level, to not float through every day. It's pretty easy. Like I said, you get this long season. It's a grind where you're playing a bunch of games and you have practices in between. It's easy to just kind of show up at the rink, especially when you have some familiarity with the coach, the coaching systems, the practices, and the drills. It's pretty easy to almost shut your brain off a little bit, just go through the motions, get through drills, and then that's another day, right? And then you look forward to your next game. Whereas I was taught at a young age that, every day can make a difference and every drill has a purpose. So if you're going out there with a true intent to get better in every drill and everything that the coach is trying to make you do, there's a reason behind that. And it all sounds super cliche, but it's actually really hard to do in real life when you're in the heat of a season and it's just tiring, your body's tired, whatever, you got in late last night, you had a long flight, whatever it was, it's a grind. So to be there mentally every day is actually harder than it would seem, I guess.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's one of the things that we talk about on this show a lot, and even with the kids I work with, whether it's on a team or privately, is that level of intention that you just mentioned there is like it doesn't get talked about enough. I really don't think it does. Like even you mentioned a cliche. I don't think a lot of coaches are going there, but like every drill has a purpose, and you can apply a different level of intentionality that's even beyond the practice, right? So the coach is doing something, but if you arrive at the rink with an idea of like, this is what I want to get better at, now you're focused on trying to do that and you're there for a reason. And, some people term it deliberate practice, right? Is more effective than just practice. So if you can provide that level of deliberateness, my God, like I see it now in my kids. I see it even in me, right? At 44, not that I'm trying to be pro anymore, but like if you put a level of effort in with some intention, man, like you get a lot better, a lot quicker. It's crazy. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That's cool. You also mentioned earlier, which I think is a really cool thing that we should talk about, is the ability to maybe coast when you're one of the better guys. And he mentioned being, part in Spokane. I don't really care where you're from. I guess if you're from a bigger place and a bigger ecosystem, you have a little bit more comparables, right? So maybe there's probably going to be more competition, but I still think it's the same. If you're one of the best in your team, especially at a young age, it's easy to feel a bit superior, and it's easy to take a day off, and it's easy to not feel grateful for where you're at. How did you learn that, or what was the lesson that taught you that, what, I still got to push here and I still got to try and get better?
I don't know if it was just myself doing that. It was almost like I had to do it to survive. And I think that we'll probably unpack that as we go through my journey a little bit. And anyone that's listening to this that knows my journey at all will know what I'm talking about. But I mean, I'm with the Spokane Braves, and then I jumped to the Spokane Chiefs. And I remember my first couple games with the Spokane Chiefs. I'm like, wow, I have to go all out every day, every shift. I can't just float like I could in junior B and still have success. Like this is going to be really, really hard. And then I go from there to the U of A, which Canadian University, maybe people don't know, is actually really, really good, super underrated. And it's the same thing. Like, wow, this is a big step. I'm really going to have to work hard to be my best every single day. I go from there to professional levels in Europe, in Austria to begin with. Same thing. Now I'm playing pro. Now I'm playing for keeps. All the guys I'm playing against, they're playing for keeps, playing for paychecks, and that's a big change. And then it just progressed from there. Sweden, American Hockey League, NHL, bubble NHLer to full-time NHLer. It's always this whole progression, I was kind of forced in my own journey to always be pushing myself and getting better, because if I didn't, then I wouldn't have survived, right? I wouldn't have, or at least I wouldn't have flourished. Maybe I would have stayed where I was and had a career in Austria or Sweden or whatever it was. But if I wouldn't have pushed myself to get better each and every day and each and every season, then I mean, we wouldn't be here talking about my journey, right? Like we are today.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, good for you. And you kind of went through it right there. I mean, maybe we should get into that a little bit. And you talked about getting to Spokane. So you arrive in the scene in Spokane, hometown kid, and we're a contributor for sure, like a big contributor. I mean, you're one of the team leaders in points there. You mean you weren't throwing up? You mean, to be honest, you weren't throwing up huge numbers when it came to junior numbers, right? But you're still leading the team, and you were a big cog in that wheel. And during that draft year, let's say, there's two things I want to talk about, because I know you're a late birthday too, and I want to know about the significance of that played on you in your career. But when was the draft something that you were like expected to get drafted? I mean, I assume you wanted to get drafted, but where was your expectation level around that, and what was your draft year like?
Yeah, certainly interesting to look back on that. So I was an 18-year-old rookie in the Western Hockey League. So that was my first year. Had a pretty good year. I was, I don't know, Western Conference Rookie of the Year. Ended up losing to a goalie from Brandon Plant, I think. I can't remember who it was. He won goalie, the Rookie of the Year. So, kind of being in that Rookie of the Year discussion helped me out a little bit, and thought maybe there was an outside chance of getting drafted. But it ended up not happening. I remember a day or so after the draft, I got an email from our coach with the Chiefs, who had just gotten let go. They were bringing Bill Peters on. It was Al Conroy. He just got let go, and he's a smaller guy, played in the NHL, and kind of had a similar style of play to me. And I remember him just saying, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. You didn't get drafted. A lot of guys that do get drafted, that's just the beginning, and they don't end up making it. And then a lot of guys that don't get drafted, that's just the beginning, and they end up having great careers, future Hall of Famers potentially even. So he basically just reiterated the point to me that that's not the end of the journey. That's not the deciding factor here. And just to put things in perspective a little bit, we have to remember this was, I don't even know what this was, my draft year, but a long time ago. And NHL teams were looking big at this point, and I was a small, skilled forward. It wasn't really the NHL prototype, I guess you could say. That they were looking more for guys that had size, and then maybe they could turn them into the hockey player they needed them to be, more so than the smaller, skilled guy, and see if he can play in the NHL. So it was tough for me. I definitely got overlooked, and I think I continued to get overlooked throughout my career for sure, and especially my career with the Chiefs. I mean, my 19 and 20-year-old years, I led the team in scoring in both years, and had some success. Wasn't throwing up huge numbers, but at the same time, pretty good to lead the team in scoring. So definitely an underdog, I guess, starting to be born at this part in the journey.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe we'll get into that whole aspect of like, when did you start feeling that you maybe were like, was there ever any resentment? Did you ever feel like, why not me? How come I'm not getting a shake here? And did that start building a little bit of a chip on your shoulder?
I don't think so. As I look back, I kind of remember just being pretty happy to be there. I was playing my hometown team. I was doing pretty well, having a lot of success, playing in all the key moments, kind of one of the top dogs, assistant captain, all these things. And the NHL was kind of a far off dream still at this point. I obviously wanted to play in the NHL, but at the same time, I think I was just living in the moment, enjoying life at home, playing in the Western Hockey League, and just kind of living in that moment. So I don't think I felt any resentment or like, I should be playing I should have been drafted in the NHL or whatever it is at this point in my career. Anyways, I don't think I felt that.
I did mention your birthday. So there's some, definitely a lot of listenerships as either parents of this or youth hockey players growing up. And I know having a later birthday, and two of my sons qualify as that too. One of them's going to have a birthday here at the end of November.
I mean, it's a big difference for a long time, right? Because you're playing catch up, and you mentioned yourself that you're not necessarily a big guy to begin with, so you're an undersized guy. And I'm sure at the youth level growing up, you know, it was even more apparent when you were younger. What type of a factor did that play for you, you know, on your hockey journey?
Yeah, I think it's probably been talked about a lot, but it's definitely hard, and I better watch what I say. My son, my firstborn, he's 6, and he's December 12th birthday, so he's following in the same footsteps as me, and I'm even seeing him at the 8U level. He's the younger guy on the ice. I mean, he's the youngest guy on the team, smallest guy on the team, and I think I was pretty much in the same boat where, you know, you're always playing against kids that are 1 or 2 years older than you. And you know what? I mean, whatever. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that pushed me to get better and to be more feisty. I know maybe not me, but my son's maybe a little more feisty than most, just getting bumped around by the bigger kids. And that, I think that competitive nature that's in him kind of gets out a little bit when that's happening. So, I mean, that being said, obviously it's an uphill battle. It's tough. It's the kids that are born in January, February, March definitely have a significant advantage in that regard. But at the same time, I think most, you know, hockey minds and scouts and whatever, they're aware of that. So it's not something that just gets brushed under the rug anymore. I think that birth dates they're well aware of that, and that comes into the equation.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been following the Bantam draft a little bit closer, and it's actually still really heavily drafted. Like the first 3 months of the year is crazy because, well, I mean, I assume just because of the physical nature, right? You're even at 15 years old, right? I shouldn't say even. I mean, you have so much developing left to do on a physical level. Some guys mature earlier than others. That it's easy to kind of look at the kid who's really big and strong, like right now, and not think this guy might get bigger and stronger. So. I do think that it's, like you said, it could be a good thing though, because you are chasing, you know, you are in a scenario where you're a little bit behind, and you have to show up. I think it's the only time is the advantage is in the NHL draft when you finally get that extra year of junior. You know, like That's the only time that it becomes now an advantage. You get an extra year under your belt for most guys, and they have a little bit more you know, experience in the league and feel a little more comfortable, and probably in a little different role. Some of these guys, right, having a late birthday, but. I want to talk a little bit about you getting into the U of A, because now you've played there, you've been successful there. Was a pro contract dangled at any point? Like, did you say no to a pro job and then go to university, or was it the only option?
Yeah, this is an interesting crossroads in the journey, and we'll see a couple of other crossroads too that are interesting to look back at now that I'm here, you know, in the NHL. These crossroads are just so important. But at the same time, here I am 20 years old and trying to make a life-altering decision. You know, obviously the parents helping me out and whatnot, but yeah, I had some pro opportunities, but mostly minor leagues, obviously like East Coast League, something like that. I never really had a full-time, full-on American Hockey League opportunity. If I would have had that, it probably would have changed the decision a little bit. But just having those East Coast League offers, I think it was almost a no-brainer. Like, hey, like I said before, schooling is super important. I don't want to just throw that away by going to play in East Coast League for a year or two or whatever to figure things out. And so I think it was pretty evident right away when I was making those decisions with my parents. You know, I want to use my schooling, and I was ignorant at the time too, like most people are. I wasn't fully aware of CIS, which is currently U Sports, I guess, the Canadian University League, which is actually a really, really good league, and I think it's gotten better even since I've left. So it was an interesting time. I was getting some interest from a couple of different schools: UBC, University of Alberta, University of New Brunswick, some of the top programs and great schools and top hockey programs in the country. And it was a hard decision, but we ended up making the decision to go to Edmonton, mostly because it was close to home. The U of A hockey program kind of speaks for itself. It's the #1 program, has the most national championships, a great school, you know, top 50 university in the world. And I think at this point I was a little sick of losing too. I'd spent a lot of time losing with the Spokane Chiefs. I had a pretty good career there, and you know, led the team in scoring twice, but only made it to the playoffs 2 out of my 4 years, and both of those years eliminated in the first round. So didn't have a lot of winning success, and I was sick of that. So I wanted to go to a program where I wanted to win, and I thought the U of A kind of gave me that best opportunity to do that, which it did. I ended up winning the national championship once and going to the national tournament all 4 years. So that definitely played into the equation as well. But I don't know, it's just crazy to look back on these crossroads now and feel like, if I would have made a different decision, it would have turned out differently. Who knows?
Yeah, well, there's two choices there that I wouldn't mind you expanding on. One is you didn't mention any U.S. schools, and you're an American kid. Like, was that part of what was Spokane not prepared to pay for a U.S. school, or why was it just Canadian hockey you were looking at?
Yeah, they would have, but at that point I would have had to stop playing hockey. So I couldn't go to U.S. school and continue to play hockey because of my NCAA scholarship was burnt, obviously, by playing in the Western Hockey League. So at that point, I wasn't ready to give up on hockey. I wanted to still play hockey, and Canadian University basically gave me my only options to do that and go to school at the same time.
So even if you pay, then that was one thing that you're educating me. Then I thought that I knew the scholarships were not like you were ineligible for a scholarship if you laced up for the WHL team. But I thought you could still play in the league. You just wouldn't be eligible for a scholarship. But that's not true.
That's not true. Yeah, I don't know if that's still true. I'm pretty sure it is. I'd say 99% sure. But I couldn't have gone to school and play hockey in the U.S.
So the next one is, so you had these job opportunities potentially in the East Coast League or like some of these leagues. School sounds like was the biggest determining factor because, and correct me if I'm wrong, geez, maybe I might be wrong there, but not many guys come out of CIS and go play in the NHL, right? First of all, so if that was your dream.
Yeah.
Right? Some guys do it to the East Coast League, but there's not that many people that do that either. So I was just wondering, like from a hockey standpoint, and you like thinking down the road future, was it more about like life future at that point? Hey, I can play hockey and get my education, or did you actually think that was the best hockey route as well?
I think more the latter there, where this is the best life decision. I can continue to play high level hockey, have some success and win as a team, and probably go on from there if I do really well and play some sort of minor professional or professional in Europe is probably more of the mindset at that point. 90% sure that would be more of the chance, more the likelihood than playing, minor pro in North America. But definitely more of a life decision where, okay, I can go and get an education and then afterwards, maybe enter the real world and get a real job.
Right. Before we leave the Chiefs, I guess we got to ask about the nickname because you could have put in whatever name you wanted there on the screen and you chose Doc. So can you give us the genesis here of Doc? And I think that's still a nickname that you have today, correct?
Yeah, that's what I get called in the Flames dressing room. Basically, if you're like an original friend from way back in the Spokane Braves days, then most guys from those days will call me DR. That was my nickname going forward. And I think it was my first camp in Spokane with the Chiefs. I was, 16 or 17 years old. One of those dressing room rituals where you kind of go around the dressing room and say who you are, where you're from, and your nickname. And so there I am, hey, I'm Derek Ryan. My nickname's DR. And it was one of the older Lynch brothers. I think it was Scott Lynch. He stood up and said, DR? We're not going to call you DR. We're going to call you Doc because your initials are DR. And for whatever reason, it just stuck. That was it Bill Peters just took that and ran with it. Al Conroy did, and all the boys did. And from there on, the rest is history. I'm Doc.
Oh, I love the genesis of hockey nicknames. Sometimes there's a huge story. Sometimes it's just as flippant as what you just said there. Just somebody says it at the right time and it sticks. I love it. That's great. So you hit the CIS. You mentioned that was good hockey there. I have to admit I've never watched a game of CIS hockey, so I have no idea what that's like. But you definitely had success there, and I noticed you were recognized, within the league as being one of the best, one of the better, if not the best players in it. You had a former teammate with you there as well, by the name of Chad Clausen, I believe. If I did my research right on that, did that have any bearing on you going there?
Yeah, a little bit for sure. I remember I played with Chad quite a bit when my Spokane Chiefs days. We were line mates, so I talked to him quite a bit before, committing to the U of A, and he had a lot of good things to say. And there were some other guys there too, Krymusa, and I mean, there's the U of A was basically filled with ex-WHL guys that led their team in scoring that just never got that NHL opportunity. There's Tyler Metcalf, Ian McDonald, Dylan Stanley, and you guys probably have no idea who these names are, but go on Elite Prospects and look them up. And they had some legit. I mean, Chad Clausen had a 90-point year in the Western Hockey League before I was there. So this, I mean, these are legit top and high end players in the Western Hockey League that just were like me, that just never got that opportunity with an NHL contract and didn't want to waste their schooling. So it was filled with super high end players.
Right. I was actually going to ask you that. I mean, I didn't know if you were buddies with him or not, but you guys had similar stats. In Spokane when you guys played together, he had the 1 year before you arrived. That was a big year for him, like you mentioned already, that 97-point year. And then when you guys were together in Edmonton, had similar stat lines. You've obviously continued on, and now have a 3-year contract with the Calgary Flames. And I don't know what Chad's doing, but he didn't have much of a pro career. Were you similar players? And if so, what do you think made the difference for you being able to go where you've ended up?
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't know if that's been touched on a lot, so that's good. So, yeah, Chad and I were pretty similar. I was the centerman, obviously. He's the winger, so I think that might have had a little bit to do with it. But from my perspective, this is kind of how the story went. He played 5 years at the U of A. He was there 1 year before me. I played 4 years, so both of our careers at the U of A were finished at the same year. And we were both looking to play some sort of European professional hockey after our careers. And there was a team in Székesfehérvár, Hungary, in the Austrian league that was looking for one forward, highly talented offensive forward. The coach there was a University of Alberta graduate, so the alumni connection came through there, and he ended up calling my coach, mine and Chad's coach from the U of A, Eric Thurston, and asked for a recommendation. And Thirsty at this point gives the recommendation to me. Talk about crossroads before. He could have said Chad, he could have said somebody else, but he says, this Derek Ryan kid's the one you want. And so this team in Hungary and the Austrian league, ends up signing me, and I get that opportunity to start there for a full season, kind of jumpstart my professional career, my European professional career. And if you look at the Hockey DB or the Elite Prospects, you'll see that Chad ended up there at the end of that season, kind of towards the playoffs, and he played there and had some pretty good success and played well. But, it's a lot harder to jump onto a new team, mid-season / almost playoff time and have a profound effect, whereas I had that whole season to kind of adjust and have a bigger effect over the longer period. So I don't know if it was a huge difference, if it would have mattered, but pretty crazy to think about, if Thirsty would have recommended someone else or Chad over myself or whatever it is. Right. So I get that opportunity, and the rest is history.
Wow, that's pretty wild. I mean, I reflect on that a little bit myself, and it's come up here before, and it's one of those things that you can't fake. And now I'm talking about the relationship, right? The building the relationship with the coach or with an assistant coach. It has to come naturally. You can't force it. You can't be ingenuine about it, but it is so damn important that you earn the trust of that guy who's blowing the whistle at practice and who's calling your name on the bench. And because of times just like that, like you said, he could have said somebody else easily, and who knows where Derek Ryan is at this point, right? If that phone call goes a little bit differently. And it happens time and time again that people need people to go to bat for them. How do you, in your mind, think, like, how do I build trust with my coach? Like, what would be the lesson to kids out there to be able to do that and to be the guy that when he answers the phone, he's going to say their name?
Yeah, that's a really good thought, really good question. I think that's really important for kids, and it's been really important for me in my career. I mean, we'll get there later, but Bill Peters, instrumental in my original NHL existence, really, and same kind of thing. But I mean, I've never been the player that's like, really buddying up to the coach. I think that my play in itself is what really lends itself for coaches liking me and appreciating me. I think it goes back a little bit to what I talked about before, how I'm showing up every single day at practice, in the weight room, and on game day as well to make myself better. Coaches notice those things. It might seem minuscule to us. It might seem minor, but these are the little details that coaches are noticing day in and day out. And I think that, I mean, it was no different with Mike Bay at the junior B level, Bill Peters in the Spokane Chiefs, Eric Thurston at the U of A. They all spoke really highly of me, not to pump my own tires, but because of the player I was, because of what I brought to the rink every day, what I brought to the dressing room every single day. And I think those actions speak louder than anything, any kind of fake or forced relationship you can have off the ice with the coach. It all happens, between the whistles, on the practice rink and on the game rink.
Yeah. I encourage anyone that I talk to, like, I mean, I don't mind conversations. I think obviously that's fine. That's being human. That's being, personable. Usually you want to let a head coach to approach you, or any coach generally. I mean, when you're talking about just niceties and general conversation. But I do encourage guys to include the coach on their journey. And I think that's one thing that people get a little bit fearful of, is that approach and saying, hey, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to get. How do I get better? I think coaches like hearing that, as long as you're willing to back up what they tell you, and I think you can expose yourself a little bit there if you don't go to work and have the accountability. But I do encourage guys to have that, because I mean, people want to be a part of a dream, right? People want to be a part of something cool. You doing what you did, I know personally, I'm sure you've seen it now being a dad, that you root for guys. There's guys you want to root for. And if you can be a guy that people want to root for, my goodness, it helps you. And I think involving people in that journey and in that dream is a good way to do it. Do you think that's an okay approach as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think coaches definitely want to be a part of that, and they want to hear players say that. I think you're pretty accurate when you say you expose yourself there. I think that there's a lot of people that I can think of off the top of my head, players that I play with that speak that way, that talk the talk, but then don't have the actions to back that up. Like, hey, yeah, I want to do whatever it takes to win. I want to do whatever it takes to make the NHL. But then when push comes to shove, they're really not willing to do any of that to win or to play in the NHL or to be the best or whatever it is, whatever part of life they're in. And I think that your human nature, your human characteristics will show eventually anyways. I don't think you can fake it. You can't force it. It's just who you are. And if that's who you are, then coaches and leaders and teachers and whoever, parents, are going to appreciate and like you for those reasons.
Yeah. When you're in the U of A, you're doing well in the U of A, you find this pro contract. At what point, or at any point, was the NHL like either in the rearview mirror? Was it still like on your radar? Was it someplace you thought you could end up? Or like, walk me through that as far as your own dream, your own belief system.
Yeah, not for a few years at this point. When I signed that first pro contract in Austria, this is basically I'm recently married to my wife. I think we've been married 1 year at this point. This is like a 1 year experiment where we'll go to Székesfehérvár. It takes us 3 months to figure out how to pronounce the town name. And we'll go to this city in Hungary, which is like 45 minutes outside of Budapest. Kind of a cool experience for a young married couple, nonetheless, no matter how the hockey goes. A cool experience to be able to travel the world a little bit, experience a different culture. And we'll just try it out. Maybe I have success in hockey, but we don't like living over there and we don't have to continue to do it. Or maybe I don't have success hockey-wise and it doesn't continue anyways. Or maybe it works out and we love it and we'll just play in Europe, and I'll try to carve out a hockey career over there for as long as I can. But the NHL at this point, I'd say would be thrown out the window probably when I decided to go play Canadian University. In my own mind at this point, that's how I thought. And it didn't come back onto the radar for a few years after this, I wouldn't say.
Gotcha. Do you know the stat of people who have started in the Austrian league and ended up in the NHL? You mean you have to be one of a very short list, like I would assume.
I mean, I can think of some Austrian players that grew up there, Michael Grabner, Michael Raffel, but guys that actually, like, North American guys that started there and played in the NHL, I think I might be the only one. I could be wrong, but
right.
There's got to be, count them on one hand for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. So I had some experience overseas too. I went to Germany, maybe about the same time. I was 26. I'd played 6 years pro over here. And then I was my idea of going over there was just sort of felt like I wasn't getting my shot, like I was the flashy guy when I was 20, 21, 22. And then you kind of seem like you're getting forgotten about and overlooked. And I was like, well, you know what, I'm going to go overseas, have a good year, hopefully, and then come back. Like that was kind of my idea of what I was going to do. And then actually just ended up like really enjoying it. Like you said, like the experience around the hockey and the hockey itself were both like big pluses for me. I'd been traded a lot. I'd been on different teams. Like the stability was nice. The paycheck was also nice. And the experience was nice, and they offered me a 2-year extension my first year, and I ended up signing it. And for me, that was sort of when it was like, all right, well, I guess I'm not going to be in the NHL anymore. I had to I thought I was letting that dream die, and I guess I didn't really have to, but that was sort of where I turned my own switch on that NHL dream. You ended up lighting it up in Austria, right? You ended up getting real comfortable there, ended up lighting it up, ended up winning the, I believe, the MVP of the league. And is that when, like, how did you get scouted then for Swedish? Is that how that worked? Like, do those leagues over there scout each other, and your name was just kept floating up to the top, and somebody wanted to piece you and get you out of that league?
Yeah, pretty much. But I think it can't be overstated how unlikely, we talked about how unlikely it is to make it from Austria to the NHL. And it may not be equally as unlikely, but pretty close to make it from Austria to Sweden is pretty unlikely as well. There's more guys that have done that, but at the same time, Austria is kind of maybe middle of the road, entry level, professional European level, and then the Swedish league, the Swedish league is probably one of the best leagues in the world. It goes NHL, KHL in Russia, and then SHL in Sweden. In my opinion, that's the third best league in the world. So they're pretty strict and picky about what guys they allow coming over there. And for a guy like myself, they typically prefer guys that have better North American resumes. And my North American resume at this point is Western Hockey League and University of Alberta, which to them is like, what's that? It's like a men's league or whatever. They have no idea what that is. So they prefer guys that have, some sort of NHL experience or a lot of American League experience, which I had neither at that point. So for me to get the opportunity to go from the Austrian League to Sweden was actually a really big jump as well. And the team in Sweden making a pretty big risk, I guess I should say, in signing me to come play there too. So that was an exciting time to be able to make that jump. It wasn't just like hey, I can have a great career in Austria. This is turning into, I can, be in one of the top leagues in the world, one of the top leagues in Europe, make really good money, and this European career thing could probably turn out.
Cool. So that was a pay raise then for you to go to Austria to Sweden?
Yeah, it's about double the salary. And so that was a big deal for sure. It was a 2-year contract, one of the kind of the smaller teams in Sweden, but still a pretty good opportunity. So that was a big deal to make that jump.
Cool. So your success there, I assume you had an agent, a European agent. So like they would have contacted him or your coach, or kind of the same scenario. What's this guy like? I'm sure they did some homework on you, saw you play, and then made you the offer, and off you went.
Yeah, pretty much. There's similar things going on where there's another team involved, kind of one of the more premier teams in Sweden, in Leksand, a super small city, but they're kind of like the Toronto Maple Leafs in the NHL, where they have fans everywhere. They come to our rink, and 70% of the fans were Leksand fans. And that first year in Sweden, I kind of caught a lot of grief from them for not signing with them, because everything, I guess, is public here in the NHL too, but everything is public there in terms of who's signing with who, and guys sign with different teams for the next year during the middle of the season. And it's just a little different in Europe than it is in North America. So I caught a lot of heat from the press and the fans over there for doing that. And obviously still one of those crossroads again, but that team ended up getting relegated to the second Swedish league after my first year in Sweden. And right. We ended up making the playoffs and whatnot. So
that is a cool point that maybe we should I should mention. I don't know if many of the listeners know, but yeah, in Europe, in lots of places in Europe, and I know for sure in Germany where I was, that at any point during the season, another team can sign you for the next season. So like it happened all the time. So you'd be playing with a guy on your team who you knew was going to be on another team the next year. Like it's so absurd. It seems so weird, right? Yeah. Even I I don't know, you got to question intent sometimes and motive and, you know, like all these things. It makes the whole scenario kind of weird. So yeah, in my own scenario, like my own team signed me, which is a little more normal. Like that at least happens in North America. But the fact that another team can sign you is super weird. You mentioned, I love the fact you put a hierarchy on the leagues. And I think that we should maybe dig into that a little bit, because that's an interesting discussion topic, because you have played in a few of them. Now, I guess you haven't played in the KHL, but you know guys that have come from there. You have played in the Swedish League, but you've also played in the American League. You never put American League on there. Would American League be fourth then, in your opinion? And it kind of surprised me that you didn't have it maybe a notch or two higher.
Oh, that's a really good question. It's really hard to make that comparison. I have this conversation. I especially had this conversation when I was playing in the American League, when I was playing with guys there. So NHL for sure, KHL for sure second. I think the Swedish League is better. I think the Swedish League is more talented than the American Hockey League. I don't know if this is a straight apples to apples comparison, because as most people probably know, that the style of play in Europe is so much different. The rink size is, I don't know what it is, 15 feet wider. The zones are way bigger. So that just lends itself to be a completely different style of play. You know, there's way more puck possession, way more skill, way more talent, and I guess use of that talent, I should say. Whereas in the American League's tough. It's tough to rank the American League because it's such a unique place where guys are just kind of running around like chickens with their head cut off, trying to kill guys and trying to get noticed and just trying to stand out a little bit. Whereas I rank the Swedish League higher because it's a lot more structured. I think it plays a lot more like the NHL in terms of how structured it is, how defensive it is, how hard it is to create offense, unless you're a high-end player that can make those plays in little areas. And so that's why I rank Sweden higher than the American League. I think it's harder to score and to be a producer in the Swedish Hockey League than it is the American Hockey League.
Interesting. That's cool. And not that this is a challenge at all, but I find it interesting that you actually had more success from a point standpoint in Sweden than you did in the American League.
Totally.
And maybe that's just indicative of, like, you know, I don't know, style of play, who your teammates were, who your line mates were, like, who knows? There's a lot of factors that can go into that. But the American League is a tough place to, I think it's more mistake prone, probably, is what I would say. You know, like it's younger guys, right? And I think you mentioned it being almost like a junior all-star team at the CIS. And I think that's even more so in the AHL, right? You have all these guys that were kind of the best of the best in their junior leagues coming together and fighting for these hallowed spots in the NHL. And they're still young, right? You're still making mistakes. So you're going to get a few chances every game, but it's definitely a more physical game, I would say, than Europe.
For sure.
And like you said, I guess, unstructured, I think, is valid. I mean, it's less structured just because you have guys maybe trying to do more, or maybe just still trying to figure the game out a little bit. Whereas that Swedish league, there is, even in Germany, right? There was it was a different game there because everyone was older. They'd usually come from somewhere else, or it stayed there, and it's wise old veterans playing the game. When you went to Sweden now, so you're at an all-time high, I would assume, with confidence. You must be feeling really good about your game. You kind of figured out Austria out. Had a great season there, and now you're going to this league that you knew was good. You knew it was an uptick. There's probably some pressure on you because they gave you some money. How were you feeling from a mental side, going to a new country, new league, didn't know anybody? How was that process of showing up for camp?
Yeah, I was nervous for sure. There was a lot of pressure because of who I was, the money they were giving me as an import there. You're expected to produce. I just remember my first couple of days, maybe first week, showing up for training camp, and these guys were serious. This was a big change from Austria, where, guys would show up and work pretty hard, and you had some talented guys, but, third or fourth line guys are pretty suspect. You could expose them in a game. Whereas top to bottom rosters in Sweden, these guys were good. You had fourth line guys that could be first line guys in Austria, their talent level. These guys were just monsters in the gym every single day. And I'd say this is probably when my appreciation for work in the gym started to really blossom, was at this point where the trainer was just hardcore. He made us work out and do crazy stuff all the time. They'd fly imports in the summertime to do fitness testing and blood testing. You'd show up in training camp and you'd have some pretty serious fitness testing which we never really had that in Austria. You get a little bit of fitness testing, how many push-ups you can do or whatever, but not really serious stuff. So I just remember thinking in my first few days, like, this is a big step up. This is going to be hard. And this is another point in my career where I just had to learn to adjust. I had to learn to adapt to the different style of play. The style and play in Austria was pretty open-ended, pretty high offense, high octane, where you'd get a couple of 2-on-1s a game, definitely a handful of 3-on-2s. Whereas in Sweden, like you said, you have these older guys that have played wherever in the NHL or high-end European leagues, and then you have these high-end young Swedes that are just, uber talented and working crazy hard in the gym, and they lock it down defensively. This is super structured. You have some huge, awesome goaltenders in this league, and I always joke that, a Swedish hockey league game that ends 1-0 is the best hockey game ever in Sweden. They love that. If it's a 1-0 game, it's just super structured, super defensive, and you just can't create offense. It's super hard. And I've seen a ton of guys come and go from the American Hockey League or even the NHL and end up in the Swedish Hockey League, and they'll message me and be like, how did you have success in this league? This league is so hard to create offense, which it is. I don't know. I must have just had a lot of chemistry with my line mates and had some luck and blessings that year, but it was a hard league to play in. And I remember the first month or so, it was a big eye opener for me in terms of I really need to change my game and become a well-rounded two-way player to have success here.
So you show up there. I mean, knowing it was going to be harder, like you had that expectation,
Of course.
But you're also like now balancing a whole new country and a whole new culture, and you're also balancing new teammates in a new language. I mean, a lot of those Swedes do speak English, but how, like, did you take it all at once, or was your focus just on like trying to understand the hockey, or you're trying to get friendly with the guys? Or I'm asking that question because for me it was always a tough one when I got traded. Like, where does your focus go, right? Because like you want to be liked and you want to fit in and you want to be one of the boys. Sometimes that doesn't always mean showing up 2 hours before practice and working on your game though, and trying to get better at that. It's sometimes there's differences. How was your approach showing up there?
Yeah, I think it was different than my approach in Austria for sure. I know my wife and I kind of dove headfirst into the Austro-German culture, Hungarian culture. We tried to learn the language during our couple of years in Villach, Austria. We were taking German lessons and just diving right into the culture and trying to really enjoy that part of the experience, which is huge. It's important for North American to do that, to have some sort of comfort and feel happy over there. But in Sweden, it became more of a job for sure. It became more serious. Like, I need to focus more on the hockey, focus more on the weight room, what I'm doing to get better. And yeah, I mean, I wanted to be one of the guys, and it just so happens, I'm sure you can speak to this too, on these European teams, you just naturally congregate with the other North Americans. That's just how it is. The Swedes, like you said, they speak really good English. They try to include you, but you automatically befriend all the other Canadian or Americans that are over there. And I was no different than that. I had a really good friend in Brian Wilsey. He played in the NHL for 400 or 500 games with LA and Colorado. He sat next to me in the dressing room, and he'd probably laugh at me for saying this, but I think he kind of became my mentor a little bit that year, and just kind of taught me the ropes in terms of, how to treat my body, how to take care of my body in a serious professional way, not just, haphazardly rolling out after a game, but really taking it seriously. And I remember just picking his brain a lot about, Wilsey, tell me about life in the NHL. Tell me about the flights. Tell me about the cookies you get on the plane. Tell me about the Ritz-Carlton. I remember just bugging him constantly about what it was like to play in the NHL. And I think he loved it. He told me all kinds of fun stories about his time in the NHL. And I think that's really when it started to be like, wow, that would be pretty cool to experience something like that. I don't know if I can do that, if that'll ever happen for me, but if I can, that would be a really cool experience. That sounds fun.
Oh, I'm smiling listening to that because I'm getting goosebumps. I mean, I think how much of that was building your belief or contributing to the fact of where you got? I mean, from the mindset side, you mentioned the mental strength earlier, and I'm a big proponent of the mind, right? Like what we believe can happen. We have to believe it for it to happen a lot of times. And you asking those questions and being curious and being like childlike almost in your approach, right? You mean like is super innocent, but like really awesome at the same time, because a lot of people are just too proud, right? Or too, you don't want to expose that vulnerability of, yeah, that I am curious, that I am interested, that I want to know. So, I mean, there's a lot of levels to that I just love. Did you think it was a contributing factor for you ending up where you did?
I mean, in the moment, I wouldn't have thought that way, but looking back now, I feel like it was. I mean, and like you said, I was childlike about it, but this was like my first real exposure to a full-time NHLer. You know, like I said, he played 400 or 500 games. He'd been in the NHL for quite a long time. In my perspective, at that point, I'm like, just tell me about it, Wilsey. Tell me what it's like there. That's the glory land, you know, that's where every hockey player wants to play. Tell me what it's like there. And I just remember eating it up, you know, just spoonful by spoonful, just like, oh, this sounds the best. I wanna experience that. And I've kind of started to reflect on that a little bit more recently, just how, I don't know, how into it I was, how much I loved hearing about that. And I think that kind of played a factor in driving me to just, okay, I want to experience that. I want to text Wilsey in 3 years a picture of the chocolate chip cookies on the private jet going to the Ritz-Carlton, whatever. I want to show him that, and I want to experience that too.
Yeah, good for you. I think curiosity is a big trait. It was one that I talk about a lot, and allowing yourself to be curious, you know, and allowing yourself to ask those questions. And that's one thing. Maybe I'm such a big proponent of it now, is because that's something that I couldn't bring myself to do. And I was sitting in the locker room with Matt Sundin or, you know, John Van Biesbroek, or these guys that, I mean, I was curious. I am a naturally curious guy, but I just couldn't bring myself to ask the questions. And I don't know why. You know, I really don't know at the end of the day. But you talked about having mentors and having people about role models. And I think experience does mean a ton, you know, and if you can sit beside somebody and ask them, get their opinion, and have somebody to, you know, that you can walk in their shoes a little bit. It helps you envision that thing. It helps you understand it once you get there a little more clearly. I think there's a lot to that. So, I mean, it's definitely a message that I say now to anyone. I'm like, yeah, I mean, ask the questions you want to ask. I think it's a great thing to do. When, did you have any adversity at this point? Like, you know, so you show up there, you recognize that, man, I got to go to the gym. There's, you know, I got to get stronger. These guys are damn good. Was there at any point, like, did you start off hot? Like, you had a great season. Was there any point where you were like started to question yourself for your abilities?
No, I'll start off cold. I started off, I think I scored in the first game, but I only had maybe 1 or 2 points in, I don't know, the first 5 games or so, which is all right. But, you know, by import standards in the Swedish league, they want you performing at a high level. And I just wasn't there yet. And I was starting to feel that heat from the press, the media, the fans in Örebro, the name of the city, and, you know, even my teammates a little bit. And I remember them starting to rumble a little bit. I remember one of the other imports, I won't say his name, being like, I was kind of standing off the side and he didn't know I was there, but I don't know if this Ryan guy is going to pan out. You know, I don't know about him. And so I started to feel these things, and obviously my head started to spin a little bit, like maybe I'm not cut out to play here. It only lasted maybe 5 games, and I started to have a lot more success. I moved up from the third line to the first line and found a lot of great chemistry with a couple of the Swedes there, and things kind of took off from there. But it's kind of fun to look back, or funny to look back and think about those. It was maybe a week or 2 where, you know, I was struggling a little bit and starting to question my own abilities. So it's I don't know how I really got through that. I think I just kind of learned and adapted as I went there in terms of figuring out what it took to play at that level. But eventually things turned around.
Yeah, though, that is interesting. Just even the fact that you said you went from a struggling, I mean, using your words, third line scenario, to end up getting put on the first line with a couple of Swedes. Do you think that opportunity was? How do you think that opportunity came about? And then you found that clicking.
I think they put us together on the third line, and then all of a sudden we just started scoring left and right, and we became the first line, more or less, is how that went. And our chemistry just soared, and we were scoring tons of goals, and all of a sudden, you know, guys weren't questioning me anymore, and the fans weren't questioning me anymore, and you know how it goes. Once your confidence starts to build, it's a snowball effect, and I just started to feel like, okay, now this is how I have to play to play here. This is how I have to play to be effective. this is going to help me to get better, more well-rounded, playing both sides of the puck, stronger on face-offs. That was huge there, which is harder to do because you're not allowed to use your feet. Where in North America, you can use your feet to win draws. So I worked on my face-offs a lot, which has been huge for me in my NHL career as well. So I just started to, things started to kind of take off a little bit and everything started to come together.
All right, we're just going to take a short break from our conversation here with Derek Ryan to tell you about a little bit about the topics here that we're talking about. We're talking about character a lot. It seems like we're talking about mindset and mental toughness a lot here, along with other characteristics like perseverance and resilience and fighting through adversity and all this great stuff. If you are a hockey player or a hockey parent there and you want to find out more about what you can do to increase those things, one of the great places to stop is upmyhockey.com. So that's my website, upmyhockey.com. There's lots of great information on there. There's also 2 courses that I've released this year. One is a character course called Championship Character. This is where we look at character as a high performance tool. It's not only an amazing place to start your foundation as a human and as a hockey player, but I talk about it as a tool to get better and how you can develop your character further and how this development is going to affect you by becoming a better hockey player. So that's a real cool course. If you're interested in that, check it out there. I also have my Mindset Master series, which goes through 4 weeks of great stuff, building the belief set required to be your best. Really proud of both those programs. So if you want to check those out and any of the merchandise here that I've been wearing on my head and on my chest that you guys have been asking about, that's where you find that too. So upmyhockey.com, a little blurb for that, little self-promotion. Hope you guys are enjoying this episode. Now back to the conversation with Derek Ryan. No, good for you. I was going to ask about the face-offs because, that has been a hallmark of you as an NHLer now and something that teams put massive significance on because, puck possession is a huge thing and trust in the fact of, winning a draw in any zone is a big deal. What the player you are now as an NHLer, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the player you were in Sweden. It's hard. Like sometimes that doesn't transfer over, right? And I get that the roles change and everything else. That the little things you're talking about, they're learning the other side of the puck. Working on the face-offs. Those aspects are probably the aspects that have now allowed you to be where you are. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like those the subtleties of the game and the nuances of the game, which seems to be some of your really strong calling cards have seemed to earn you your spot. Is that true?
Yeah, 100%. I think that, and I picked up some of these traits, every step of the journey. Face-offs and the other side of the puck in Sweden, kind of more offensive ability, being able to make plays in Austria. I played with some great goal scorers both in Sweden and Austria, so my playmaking ability definitely, increased in those areas. But it's just so hard to make it in the NHL as a skill guy. And I see tons of guys in our organization and tons of NHL organizations where they're high-end skill, but if you're not a high-end skill guy that's good enough to be in the top 6 and you're going to be in the bottom 6, how are you contributing? How are you contributing in that bottom 6 category when you're not really expected or trying to score as much as maybe those guys in the top 6, and you are expected to contribute in different factors, whether it's penalty kill, whether it's blocking shots, whether it's face-offs, whether it's being able to just, grind players, grind other lines down on that bottom 6 role, which is a lot harder to do. And I think that a lot of guys struggle with that transition. Like, okay, I'm not quite a top 6 guy, but how do I be effective as a bottom 6 guy? And I think those skills that I acquired along my way, especially in Sweden, most likely, helped me to figure out and carve out my own role as a bottom 6 guy or a middle 6 guy in the NHL.
Right, a versatile 6, I'd call you, because I think that's one of your strengths too. From the little bit of the research that I did and the people that I talked to is that you are probably I think you were the 3rd line center mostly, right, in Calgary this past season, but you're a guy that could go up and down the lineup, right? You're versatile enough to go up, and I think from my take on it, and just now being a fan and being removed from the game, I think that's a bit of a difference between an NHL of, let's say, 10, 15 years ago to the NHL of today, is that the roles, there's still roles, for sure there's roles, but the bottom six were usually, like, they were definitely less skilled, and they were just bigger and stronger, and they would do different things kind of better than the top six. But now I think it seems the bottom six are skilled, but they have to learn and be willing to do different things. Like, I think greater depth from a skills side in an NHL team these days. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the bottom six now in the NHL is full of guys that are extremely talented. I mean, we have them in Calgary. We've signed a couple of them this offseason too. There's Joakim Nordstrom, who's been a bottom six guy his whole career in the NHL. He's a Swedish guy, but I mean, he has unreal hands. He skates faster than 95% of the guys in the NHL, but he's found a way, just like I have, to provide something in that bottom six, whatever we want to call it, role, where he can block shots, he can kill penalties, and do all these things that, in my opinion, and maybe I'm biased because I am one of these guys, but I think these are the guys that are almost the most important in winning a Stanley Cup. These guys are what win teams Stanley Cups. The guys like Nordstrom, the guys like, whatever, the bottom six guys that are able to do these important things all the way through a whole cup run. And it's just, I think it gets overlooked a lot by a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it does too. And well, I mean, I guess it depends on who you're talking to. I mean, I think a guy like Patrick Maroon is a great example right now, who's now 1-2, and just brings that element. He's not playing top line minutes, but he's bringing an element of whatever it is, grit, passion, whatever those words are that you need to go the distance. And I know I'm glad you bring that up. But there's a hard thing to do, though, I think, and maybe you can speak on this, is everybody in the NHL has scored goals somewhere else or has gotten points somewhere else. And usually that's what fires you up as a player, is that scoring, is that contributing on offense. So like when you have to now be unbelievable in your own end, or you got to be a great faceoff guy or be a really good shot blocker, that's not maybe why you started playing hockey in the first place, So like, to find a passion in that, do you ever really find a passion in that? Or is it just like a sense of accountability and ownership and pride that, this is what I do and I do it well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a little bit of passion for sure. If there's not any passion, you're not going to be any good at it. But I think that you're just able to accept that role and swallow that, swallow your pride a little bit, take a little slice of humble pie, which some guys aren't able to do that. They're not able to say, okay, I'm not a top six guy, but I should be a top six guy, so make me a top six guy. They're able to say, okay, I'm not a top six guy, so I'll do whatever it takes to be in the NHL and to contribute to my team's success. And it's the guys that are able to do that, to say that in their own head and say that to their teammates too, or prove it to their teammates by their actions on the ice. Those are the guys that have the success in those roles, and they find those roles, and coaches and GMs see that they're smarter than most, and they see that, and that's why they keep getting signed in different places for different reasons. But that's why right there.
Right. No, I know, because a lot of guys can't, right? They're not willing to shift and pivot, or they can't pick it up that late in the game either. I mean, I think that's a big thing, because what we're talking about here aren't easy things to learn. Like you've talked about working on your faceoffs for years now, right? And to get to the spot where you're at. And that's, for me, that was the underlying message that maybe now isn't so subtle, because I'm throwing it in everybody's face that's listening right now. But is like, the lesson to kids is, there's a lot of great hockey players out there that can score goals. And the quicker you can embrace getting the puck out at the blue line, learning how to PK, right? The faceoffs, blocking shots, like, be versatile, because you're probably going to be asked to do that at some point when you want to level up, to get yourself into that top six role. And when you're trying to figure it out on the job, that's not a great time to do it.
And those are the kind of the ugly things that are not so fun to work on, right? All the kids want to go out and work on their one-timers and their slap shots going bar down and whatever it is, but it's a lot harder and a lot less fun to go work on your face-offs, to go work on picking up rims off the wall and making a play, to work on, all these little things that a bottom six, or whatever you want to call them, role player has to do. And if you're not able to do that, then you're just not going to be able to play in that role.
Yeah, I agree. And if you're not Connor McDavid, you're going to have to figure out how to do it. You know, like there's just like there's a small select few that really don't have to necessarily work on that aspect, but to get to that, to get to any, you know, hallowed ground of hockey to get paid for, you're gonna have to figure that out at some point. So no, I'm glad you bring that up. What about your journey back? So you have this. We touch on your year in Sweden. Maybe not in great detail, but I mean, you light it up there. You know, you win another MVP award. I don't know what it's called there. And now it sounds like, I don't know if one or two or multiple NHL teams now have Derek Ryan on their radar. What was that off season like for you? And was it a hard decision to come back to North America?
Yeah, one of the craziest off seasons I've ever had for sure. I had several, I'd say like three-ish probably NHL teams that expressed interest in having me come back, which, looking back on our previous conversations, this is when the NHL kind of starts to come back on the radar a little bit. Like, wow, whatever, how many years ago I was in Edmonton playing the U of A and then the Austria, and now, okay, maybe this is legit. Maybe this can actually happen. But it was hard. It was a hard decision. And if I'm being totally honest, I probably was the last person that wanted to come back to North America, even after all my Brian Wilsey conversations and all that. I was kind of stubborn. I was like, no, I've carved out my career in Europe. I can do this for a long time. I can make a lot of money. If I go back and play in North America, I'm going to have to take a two-way contract. I'm for sure going to have to start in the American Hockey League. I'm going to have to take a huge pay cut to start in the American Hockey League. Not to mention a different style of play and just a cutthroat political world of the NHL, which is just inevitable. That's the way it is. And so I don't know if I really want to partake in that. And all the credit to my family. My wife was a huge advocate. Like, no, Derek, wait a second. You've dreamed your whole life of playing in the NHL. This is your chance. If you say no now, you're closing the door, right? It's not going to happen again. So this is your one chance. Swallow your pride a little bit, take a chance and see what happens. Worst case scenario is it doesn't work out and you go back to Europe and restart there and just kind of, whatever, take off where you were already. So there's no harm done pretty much. So huge props to them for pushing my humility down my throat a little bit and making me make that decision. And obviously don't regret that decision now, but it was hard at the time.
Well, I bet you even after you pressed the go button and said, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this, like you must have, like I don't know what type of, how your brain works up top, but I would think that there would have been some, oh my God, am I doing the right thing still? Right. Like, what am I getting myself into as you're coming back and going to camp?
Oh, for sure. And then there's halfway through the season where I'm still in the American Hockey League and grinding it out there. And then you have the mental state where you're like, did I make the right decision? What am I doing here? I'm making peanuts to what I was making over there. Am I really going to get my shot? It's all politics here. I'm an old guy. There's no way it's going to happen. I made the wrong decision.
That is wild because you're right. I mean, it's hard. It's a hard door to break down for anyone, even for a top draft pick. It's not an easy place to get to. And those guys are going to get a little bit longer looks and they're going to get a little bit more shakes, right? And that's just the way that world works. So for you coming in there at that stage, it was going to be a harder road for you to hoe. How about your first camp? I'd love to hear about that because, I think you're the first guy I've ever talked to that has their first NHL camp at like 27 or whatever, however old you were. Like, what was that experience like? 28?
28 years old, first NHL camp. Yeah, that was, looking back on that now, it was pretty wild. I remember showing up a couple of days early and, I see in the dressing room, there's Cam Ward, there's Jordan Stahl, there's Eric Stahl, there's Ron Hainsey. There's these guys that, maybe I haven't idolized those guys in particular, but kind of just because they're pretty big studs in the NHL. I've idolized them for the last handful of years. And, there they are in person. Can I play against them? Am I good enough to be on the ice with those guys? You have those mental thoughts, especially coming from my journey. I should be in Austria. I shouldn't be playing in this NHL training camp. What am I doing here? Definitely some mental obstacles to get over there. And it was hard. It was an adjustment for sure. It was hard for me to really adjust to that. And I don't think I don't think many guys get over that, and I'm no different. I don't think we get over that until you're able to put yourself in that position and say, you know what, no, they're human beings just like me. They're putting on their skates just like me. We just have to go out there, and I'm just as good as they are. I fit in. I can play with them. And once you're able to kind of not, it's a fine line between arrogance and, you know, being just confident in yourself, but you have to be confident in yourself. And once you're able to find that, and once I was able to find that, is when I was able to stick in the NHL full time.
So that wasn't this year, though. So I mean, at camp, how did camp go for you? Was it successful in your mind? Were you nervous? Like, how did that whole scenario go? And did you get any exhibition games, by the way?
I did, yeah. I played. I don't know, 4 or so exhibition games. I was actually one of the last two guys sent down to the American Hockey League, which I don't know if that was better or worse, but at the end of the day, you end up in the same spot. And I remember, you know, being pretty frustrated, even though my mental expectations were that I was going to start in the American Hockey League, which probably wasn't the best mental state to be in, but I was probably just a realist at that point. And so the day I got sent down, I remember being pretty disappointed and frustrated, but at the same time saying, okay, this is, you know, I knew this was going to happen. This is why I came here. I had a really good camp. Everybody in the organization, Ron Francis, Bill Peters, you know, the Hurricane players all had great things to say, and hopefully we'll get to see you at some point this year. So, you know, my hopes were still pretty high, and I felt pretty good about myself. I think I'd set a pretty good foundation for myself in my first training camp.
Oh, good for you. And you mentioned the name Bill Peters again, and we didn't touch on your decision factor. You said 3 teams were calling on you, you know, and so Bill Peters, you guys had that history in Spokane, and now here he is head coach in Carolina. I assume that played a role in your decision of where you wanted to sign, and if so, how much?
Yeah, probably huge. That was probably one of the bigger decisions, one of the bigger factors in that decision, just because I knew at this point, I've talked about, you know, being weary of the politics of the NHL game, and I just wanted to make sure I was going somewhere where I had someone in my corner a little bit. You know, I had someone that would vouch for me, that had belief in me. I wasn't going to a completely fresh, clean slate where nobody knew who I was. At least in the Hurricanes organization, Bill Peters knew who I was. He knew the kind of person I was. He knew the character that I brought to a dressing room, and he knew, just what kind of player I was. So I think that was a huge part of that decision for sure.
Yeah, that is a big part. Did you have a chance to talk to Bill before you signed or afterwards?
Yeah, before, I think they were kind of one of the later ones. There was 2 other teams to begin with, and then Bill called me, and we just had a brief conversation. He was like, "Hey, Doc, I want to get in on the action and try to get you signed. I heard you had great success in Sweden," and it kind of just snowballed from there. So talked to him then, and then obviously as camp progressed and as I got sent down, he talked to me, just kind of took me aside and explained where he was at with things and where things stood, and just kind of tried to, you know, help me along the way a little bit, because it's pretty tough going through your first NHL training camp at any age, but 28 for sure is a different experience than most, I think.
Right. So you mentioned the first year. I mean, you had AHL is not an easy league to score in either. You mean 55 points in 70 games. Looks like you had a pretty good campaign there. And you did get your first taste of NHL ice time. So you mentioned what sounded like a dark time. You know, like you're halfway through the season, you're one of the last cuts. You're wondering what the hell's going on. Did I do the right thing? Maybe other guys are getting called up in front of you, and then the phone does ring. Describe that experience and how that all came to fruition.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to talk about for sure. These, I don't know, 3-day period here is probably one of the most vivid hockey memories that I'll carry with me forever. But yeah, you talk about going through the dark times of the season, kind of battling, grinding, other guys getting called up, being pretty frustrated. The Hurricanes end up being a little farther out of the playoff race. I think they trade Eric Stahl at the trade deadline, and bam, all of a sudden I'm on a flight home from playing the Manitoba Moose, and the equipment guy comes up and taps me on the shoulder. "Hey, Doc, you're getting the call up. You're playing in New Jersey tomorrow night." And, you know, talk about a cool feeling. But we're also in the middle of a commercial flight, and I have 0 cell service. There's no internet on this flight. I mean, when you get that kind of news, the first thing you want to do is, text your wife and text your mom and dad and sister and whoever else, all your family, and let them know. So I had to wait another hour or so just with all these emotions just kind of bubbling to the surface, and finally get to some cell service on the ground, and just a cool 24 hours, but hectic 24 hours too, where we're scrambling to organize a flight for my dad and my sister from Spokane to get to New Jersey for the game, flights for Bonnie and our son Zane to come from Charlotte to get to New Jersey, calls from Bill Peters, Ron Francis, all these people reaching out to me. And through amidst all this, I'm feeling pretty nervous too, like, wow, I'm going to play in the NHL. This is really cool, but this is kind of scary at the same time. This is a culmination of a crazy lifelong journey to get to where I am now, and end up playing in the game. I remember the bright lights of the national anthem, just looking around like, wow, this is crazy. This is it. This is the big leagues. And Bill Peters had me on the second PP unit, and ended up, taking a little drag flank off the half wall, taking it to the middle, and scoring low blocker on Corey Schneider for my first NHL goal and my first NHL game. And
wow,
just a crazy moment there where, I mean, you can't even describe those emotions in words, right? It's hard to really explain that. But I remember looking up in the stands, tears in my eyes, and I'm sure I know there was lots of tears being shed in the section, whatever it was, with my family up there. And just a crazy moment along this whole journey to get to that moment where you score first goal in my first game. Just like, wow, it doesn't get any better than that.
oh my goodness, yeah, I love hearing that story, and have your family there and have them be able to come in and share that with you is super, super special. Did you end up winding down the season then with Carolina that year?
So I ended up just playing like a couple of games, and I think I got sent up and down a bunch of times because they were trying to get me to play all the Charlotte games too, because they were in a tight playoff race, and then trying to get me in some games. I think I ended up getting a concussion somewhere along that journey, so that ended there was like one game left in Charlotte that I missed, and that was kind of how the season ended. I think I only played 2 games in the NHL at that point, though.
Gotcha. So you had your taste that year. You
Pods, I better go grab a charger. My phone's gonna die. Is that all right?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Yeah. So you've had your taste. You've had your cookie, as you called it. You've been on the charter flight. You've had the cookie. You've stayed in a hotel. You've been a part of what that feels like. Now it's the off season, and I assume you have kind of a new approach to what that off season looks like, and even your mental approach maybe to what that camp is going to look like, and what you think is going to be successful or not. You mentioned the first time through, you pretty much felt you were going to start in the AHL. Did you have a different expectation the second time through?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, a little bit for sure. I felt like I'd established myself in the organization, then also kind of in my own mind, like, hey, I can play there. I can play in the NHL. I've been there. I've seen what it's like. It's really hard, but I think like I can play there. I think I figured that out in my own mind. But that being said, it's not like I was getting a one-way contract at this point. I'm getting another 2-way contract with no guarantee that I'm going to get any NHL time. They start signing guys to fill those NHL roles on one-way contracts. So, at the same time, I'm kind of like, wow, I'm going to have to grind it out a little bit again. I'm going to have to earn my spot. It's not just going to be given to me like nothing is in the NHL, right? You have to earn it. And so definitely wasn't like all of a sudden I'm an NHLer, I'm there. The work started again the next training camp. I started in Charlotte again and had to kind of work my way up. So it wasn't just given to me at that point. So it's
so you didn't. So I was wondering, because I saw some AHL games there. So out of camp, you didn't make the team again. You got sent down. And is this the second contract then? So you signed a one-year deal the first time, and you signed another deal in the off season after that first season.
Yeah, that's correct. So it was another 1-year, 2-way contract that year with obviously more money in the American League because I proved myself in North America. but at the same time, no guarantee to play in the NHL.
Gotcha. So then you start, and you had, like, from a points perspective, again, it's just a hockey DB stat line. It doesn't really tell you all the details, but you were over a point a game there. So you had 13 points in 9 games, and that was, I guess, enough to impress the brass. And they said, hey, let's bring this guy up. Or was there an injury that helped that process too?
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, I played really well myself and Brock McGinn at that point. We'd gotten called up together originally the year before, and this second year we got called up together as well. I don't know. I think there must have been some sort of injuries. We'll have to look into that. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that Carolina kind of struggled out of the gate, so they were looking for a little bit of a shakeup as well. And then as Brock and myself got called up, they started to win, and obviously in the NHL, you're in the business of winning, so you're going to keep the guys in the lineup that are helping you win.
That's great. And I mean, from a stat line too, I mean, I don't know what type of minutes you were playing, but it looks like you were productive. Like you had a successful time when you were there.
Yeah, that was, I don't think, I always get asked the question, when I felt like I was solidified in the NHL, and I don't think that whole year I felt that way. I felt like I was still, earning everything that I got. I was playing, eventually ended up playing a lot of minutes with Jeff Skinner and Lee Stempniak. We kind of had a lot of chemistry, and that line took off quite a bit. And Skins is a pretty high-end offensive talent in the NHL, so that was a blessing for sure for me, and had some success there, but definitely was still, on edge just about every day, nervous for practice, nervous for whatever, when it looked like they were going to send guys down or whatnot. And I was very aware of all the politics of when they can send guys down, and after how many games it's harder for them to send guys down, and that kind of stuff too. So there's a lot of stuff going on in your brain through all this too. It's as much mental as it is physical at that point.
Sure. Yeah, that's the grind. And the thing that the words I never heard at the NHL level was get a place. So, I mean, you getting called up from the AHL, you're staying in a hotel, which, I mean, I don't know if people understand that or not, but like you're in a hotel, like that's where home is, and you don't know when it's ever going to change or when you're going to get sent down or whatever. And that's part of the mental grind too. When did you get the tap to say, hey man, go get in a condo or an apartment, or did you that season?
Yeah, I did eventually that season. I think it's interesting you say, I don't know if people realize that. I don't think they do. I don't think people realize how hard it is. And as athletes, we're kind of glorified, we're put on this pedestal, but we're also human beings. I mean, I had a family. I recently, before that season, we'd had our second child in Spokane. So, my wife Bonnie's alone in Charlotte, doesn't hardly know many people, doesn't have any family nearby. All of her family's in Spokane, so she's grinding it out in her own way in Charlotte by herself. Meanwhile, I'm living in a Hampton Inn in Raleigh, and there's no kitchen, there's no microwave, there's no fridge. If there was a fridge, it was like this big, and so I'm eating out for every meal, and it was a grind for sure. But as I said before, I was well aware of all the CBA rules and stuff. There's the first 28 days that you have to spend in the hotel, and then after those 28 days, they can extend it for another 28 days, which they did. So it was 56 days or so in a hotel. And I think it must have been I let it go a couple days after, like 59 or 60 days. I'm like, I'm just going to call Ron Francis, which is, I can't believe I did this, but I call Ron Francis, who's the GM of the team, right, at the time. And I think I'd been doing pretty well. I'd been playing with Jeff Skinner, Lee Stempniak, and been getting a lot of points, and the team had been winning. So I must have had some confidence at that point. And I just said, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I've been in the hotel for 60 days, and I just want to know if I can get a place. And he's like, I'll call you back in 5 minutes. And 5 minutes later, he said, yep, Doc, you're good to find a place. And that's the big ticket right there, where you get the nod to find your own place in the NHL city. That's a big feeling.
Oh, that's awesome. I have a huge smile just thinking about that. Like I said, I never heard those words, and you're kind of waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and I never was able to go get a place. But for you to have the cojones, man, to make that phone call, I can't believe it. Oh my gosh.
I know.
But obviously you must have been in a good spot. I mean, I don't think you're making that call if you were, in and out of the lineup and healthy scratch, and you're probably just grateful for every day. But I mean, at that stage, you're like, well, I'm going to do this, and good for you. And did what was that? What was even that search like? Yeah, I mean, like that's an interesting thing too, because you have another year left. But you're still in the two-way. You're not going to the penthouse, I guess, eh?
I mean, it's super hard at that point, right? Because I don't know what it was, must have been January. So there's a few months left in the season. It's pretty hard to find a place that's going to give you a 2 or 3 month lease. And then, in the playoffs, you're going to get month to month after that. So, yeah, I don't know. I've eventually found something. The wife probably found it. I don't even know. But we found a little townhouse in North Raleigh. It was perfect. And they moved all of our stuff from Charlotte, which we didn't have much because we'd only been there for, 10 games or so at the beginning of the season. So it wasn't too much to move, but it was nice to be able to be reunited with the family and be around the kids again. I mean, it's just, like I said.
Couldn't imagine, right? I mean, that's the thing people don't get. Like, you're in a hotel for almost 2 months, right? Straight. And you have a family, young kids, you're not getting a chance to see. You don't even have a kitchen. And that human element of the game kind of gets forgotten about, and how hard that is, let alone now you're playing in the best league in the world and you're supposed to go perform, yet everything is kind of in shambles as soon as you leave the rink, man. It is beyond mental strength in some scenarios that you need. And I'm glad you bring that up, because some of the stuff just isn't quite right, but hey, you make sacrifices to play this great game at that level, right? And now you're in a different spot, which is also cool. I want to get to that spot because, I mean, that's now with Calgary, and you're definitely an established player, and you signed your 3-year deal, and that's all amazing. But I want to talk about Bill, because we've talked about not necessarily Bill Peters, but the ability to impress somebody enough that they want for you to be a part of things. Because a lot of times you do need that guy to open the door for you, at least help to open it, so you can like push your way in and prove yourself. And it sounds like Bill was that advocate for you. Could you speak on that? And then maybe we'll talk a little bit just about Bill now, and you mean what your feelings are about what happened with his own personal history there.
Yeah, I had nothing but great experiences with Bill, and I couldn't agree with you more on, I think we talked about it already with the coaches. I mean, the same goes for Mike Bay and the Braves, and then Eric Thurston with that recommendation to go to Europe, and then me making the decision to go to Carolina because of Bill Peters, mostly just to have that connection there. And yeah, Bill, he's a tough coach. He was kind of that old school. I mean, I had the similar mentality from my junior B coach. I saw it in other places. I went to a Western League camp in Lethbridge before I decided to go to the Chiefs, and Brian Maxwell was the coach there, so I saw it there. Babcock was around a lot when I was a kid, so I think he was a little nicer to us kids, but I'm sure I still had that that Babcock, aura, if you will. And Bill was the same. He was hard, but if you played the way he wanted you to play, he played the way you played, the way he wanted the whole team to play, then he liked you. And I think that's how most leaders and most coaches are. I mean, he might have been a little bit harder than most in terms of demanding that, but I think that was also pretty widespread in most of most guys' experiences. In that point, coaches were just hard. And yeah, I felt terrible about what happened to Bill. It's something that's been talked about in my family a lot, obviously, because Bill's been a huge part of my career in terms of helping me get to the right places. Obviously, I took advantage of all the opportunities that I was given and did what I needed to, but he also helped me get into those opportunities, I feel like. So yeah, I think we've all done things that we regret in the last 10 years. I think anyone that can say that they haven't done something that they regret in a decade is probably lying to themselves. But I know Bill was not a person to hate people, to look down on people. I know that he wasn't a person to put people in situations where they would feel subject to whatever racist or anything like that. In my experience, I never saw that. I know, and I mean, quite frankly, I had a lot of experiences with Bill Peters in 2 years in Spokane and several years in Carolina, and then at least a couple of years there, a year and a half in Calgary as well. So Yeah, I think he's a guy of high integrity. I think he obviously regrets what transpired years ago, and probably regrets how things went here in Calgary as well. But all I can say is that I have nothing but good and fond memories of him. He treated me with respect, and I never saw him treat anyone else with a lack of respect.
No, I mean, thanks for sharing that too, because I think it's easy to get caught up in the headlines, a lot of the time. And it's such a world like that. It's a headline based world and people make snap judgments. And, I didn't know Bill personally. The only person I knew that was connected to him was Kevin Sawyer, who you also know, have a personal connection with because he was assistant coach there. And again, Kevin's a guy that I respect, and that's kind of what I go on a lot of times, right? Like who do I know? And Kevin's a guy that I know, and I think he's a character guy and somebody who's a good role model and a mentor for younger kids. And he said the same thing you did, like that. When that stuff went down, he wasn't there. He has no idea, but he knows the type of guy that Bill is, and he thinks he's a good guy. And I think that should. I'm glad you said that, because maybe that's not the sentiment across hockey right now. And Bill Peters is somewhere. I have no idea where he is, but he'll probably never coach again because of the something that he did. And maybe rightfully or wrongfully so. I mean, I have no idea, and I don't want to make this a political thing. I don't know how that works in this day and age, right? Like, he did something that he shouldn't have done for sure. Does that mean he should never coach again? I'm not sure. I guess that's for someone else to decide other than me. But good for you for recognizing it, because it does take it. We don't get by. We don't do this by ourselves. That's for darn sure, right? We do need some help, and I'm glad that he was there to help you establish yourself. And now that you are, it's a pretty cool spot. I think we'll close. Well, actually, I did talk to Kevin before we got on this conversation. He says he wants his gold medal back. He said he told me that story of that the Spokane Beer League men's tournament that you guys used to play in or whatever. He goes, if it wasn't for Derek, I would have won first. He's like, he took us apart in the championship final. So anyways, he says hi and says he wants his medal.
Well, Soisy is probably one of the highest character guys I've ever met. So in terms of character references, it doesn't get much better than that, I don't think, for Bill Peters. That guy is, Kevin Sawyer is like one of the best guys I've met in hockey, so that's awesome. Yeah,
he's a good dude. I had the pleasure of playing with him. He was my captain one year in Spokane, and anyways, just a salt of the earth type of guy. And his story is a amazing one too, and a past guest here. The fact that he was able to lace it up and put on an NHL jersey is a phenomenal story of accomplishment. So, what my last question is: so now you're in this spot. You've established yourself, like you said, as being a versatile guy that can move up and down the lineup. Great on face-offs. You're doing these things. Now, for you on a personal level, older, you're in your 30s now too. Are you still aspiring? Are you still grinding it out to get better? Do you want to be a top 6 guy? Like, is there goals for you that you have on your board that's like, I'm not done yet?
Yeah, for sure. I think I still feel like I have that mentality. And I mean, you almost have to, I think, at this point, Jason. It's a grind every single day during the year, but it's a grind in the off season too. If you don't have that desire to get better every day, I mean, I'm going to work out 5-6 days a week, and that's just going to wear on you. That's not fun. If you don't love it, if you don't want to get better, if you don't believe that there's something more for you, if you want to prove people wrong, whatever your motivation factor is, if you don't have that, you're just not going to want to do that. You're not going to want to do it. And for me, I definitely have that love, that passion still. I'm not ready to hang them up. I'm ready to continue playing, to continue to evolve and adapt and be able to, be effective in different ways in the NHL and play as long as I can. And as far as I see it right now, there's no end in sight, but I'm just going to continue to have that mentality and see where I end up.
Good for you. I do have to piggyback that with one question now, because now it just came to me that you are now, you're an established 4-year, 5-year NHL vet. You're in your 30s. You're in kind of a utility role. I've had past guests like Scott Nickel and others that, stayed in the league doing those things really well, but also helping mentor and helping be an example and help role model and bring up these younger prospects and help them get into the league and understand what it takes to be a pro. Do you feel you're bringing that element to the Flames as well? And have you taken on that ownership of mentorship for some of these younger guys?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's young guys in every organization. The Flames are no different, that need that Dylan Dubé is one of the guys that jumps out to me on the Flames roster, who's a young guy, trying to figure out what it means to be a pro. He's immensely talented. He's going to be a great star in the NHL someday. But guys like that need older guys that have seen different things, different perspectives that can help him grow up and mature a little bit faster, because it's hard. Those young guys that come into the NHL right away, they have everything on a silver platter, and they're glorified, they're wealthy, the women, the whatever it is that are around them, it can be pretty overwhelming. I know it would have been hard for me at that age too. We're all just human beings. So I think that having some well-grounded, mature, experienced guys around those younger guys is priceless. And if you want guys to have long careers where they take care of themselves, take care of their bodies, and respect themselves and other people, then I think you need to have guys like that around in a dressing room. I think I definitely grabbed that role, but even more so just doing things like this, doing interviews where kids that aren't in the NHL or kids that are aspiring to be in the NHL can hear whatever it is, my story, my perspective, some humility along the way and what it takes, but also that we're real human beings, that we face these adverse times in our lives. And that's huge for not only young NHL players, but young adults everywhere.
I think so. I think a lot of people think that it's easier for others. I really do think that, especially when you're a 12-year-old kid and you're trying to play on your Bantam team, and you look up and you see these guys in these NHL jerseys and they're just better than us. They're better than me. It's easier for them, and that's not the case. Everyone has a story, and even the best of the best have their stories. So we all have to go through it in our own way and in our own time. And it is amazing that you're sharing your experiences and my past guests as well, because I do think it makes a difference. I think it makes a massive difference, whether you're in front of them and saying it or not, or whether they're just hearing it right now, whether they're riding the bike and doing their own thing, that, you know what, I got to get through this. And when I do get through this, I'm going to come out stronger and I'm going to come out better. So thank you for sharing that. I want to ask one more question for my own curiosity. When you're talking about a guy like Dylan Dubé, and now you're thinking of yourself as, or maybe you've even been told by the coach, I don't know how that actually works in Calgary, like whether you're told, we want you to be a mentor or be one of these leader guys. Do you wait for a guy like Dylan Dubé to come to you and seek you out and ask questions, or do you make that walk across the dressing room and sit down beside him and kind of take him under your wing?
I think that it happens pretty organically either way. I think that a guy like Dylan, it was pretty easy. He sees me every day. I don't even think you have to have that conversation sometimes. He sees me every day. I'm pretty vocal in terms of my beliefs. I'm a pretty religious guy, which is pretty anti everything else in, glorified, wealthy, the world of that. So I think I stand out in that regard too. So I think that naturally people are just interested, and they're going to come up to me and talk to me and ask me questions about who I am, where I came from, what I believe, why I believe it. And then that automatically just gives me an opportunity to share whatever it is, a snippet of my story, a snippet of my faith, a snippet of whatever it is that can help them to see a little bit more of reality. Because I think as you play in the NHL, especially at a young age, you get put in this little box where you think that everyone plays in this little box, but you're pretty lucky to be in there actually. So if you have a better perspective of the things that are going on around you, the lives that other people are living, and how much they would give to be you inside that box, I think that helps guys to realize, how lucky they have it, and they don't want to squander that. So there's a lot of different messages that I like to share with guys, but I think it happens pretty organically.
That's cool. Yeah, gratitude is an amazing emotion, and I think the more that we can connect to that, the better we are, and as hockey players or as people. Even on those down days, I'm sure you can think back on the times where you were in the wherever Charlotte Checkers, right, feeling down yourself. The fact that you were actually though in the AHL and playing in the AHL is a massive gift, right? And the more we can connect to that, the better off we are. I was just thinking with that whole idea, and you talk about being human. The idea of helping somebody else essentially take your job maybe at some point is a hard thing to do. And that's an interesting element of pro sports, especially. And we talked quite candidly about that with Scott Nickel, and he's like, that's essentially what my job was, and I knew it was. I'd sign 1-year deals or 2-year deals, and I was supposed to bring up the next fourth line young kid to take my job, and then I'd go somewhere else and do it again. Do you think it takes a special type of player to be able to embrace like that mentorship side when you know that maybe that this might be the guy who's going to be filling your minutes in the next season?
Yeah, I think that you just have to realize you're lucky to be there in the first place. So I think that people probably see, as we talk about this whole journey, that I have a pretty unique perspective on all of this. And so if I wasn't going to share that with anybody, I feel like that would be almost a sin, right? I think God put me through all this to share it with other people. And I don't think Dylan Dubé is going to be a bottom 6 guy, so I don't have to worry about that too much right now. I think he's going to be a top 6 guy for a long time.
Yeah.
But you just can't really think about that. You just want them to progress and to flourish. And I mean, I've done that with Andrew Montepani as well, and he's a top 6 guy now. And there's other guys too that maybe aren't going to progress into that role. Garnet Hathaway, who's now with Washington, who's definitely a solid bottom 6 guy on an NHL roster who, you know what, there's enough jobs out there for all of us. I think that if you just worry about developing character and integrity within people, then whatever happens, happens.
Good for you, man. Good for you. I love that sentiment. Yeah. I mean, it's do the right thing. Right? What is the right thing? What's the right thing for the team? And usually if you do the right thing for the team and with the right thing for that guy in the locker room, like, you're going to serve yourself and you're going to do the right thing for yourself, because that's just the way the world works, I think. So maybe that's a great way to end. Congratulations on your 300th game, by the way. That's an awesome milestone. I know you're probably expecting to blow through that. Like you said, you don't see the end in sight, nor should you. Be awesome to get through 400 and keep rolling. So thanks so much for spending your time with us today, Derek. Lot of stuff I know that these kids can take, and the parents can take too, and even pro athletes. That's the thing. There's a lot of pros that are listening to this. I mean, you can learn. You got to keep learning no matter where you're at. So again, I appreciate it. Real humble, real grateful. Tons of humility there, and I love your story. So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me anytime. Definitely one of the longer interviews I've ever done, but it went by fast and had a blast.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Thank you once again for being with us here at Up My Hockey. I know there's a lot of programs to choose from, to dive into. It seems like the list is endless, and for you to stick with us to the end here at Up My Hockey, I'm grateful for you and for your time and for sharing your time with us here. I know that conversation was worth your time. Derek's story is one that every aspiring young player should listen to, and just because it's such a movie type story that you wouldn't believe it if you didn't actually see it with your own eyes. I think everything that Derek stands for is admirable, right? Something that we can look up to. His level of dedication to the game, his passion for the sport, his commitment to being a role model and a mentor, and how important he feels to spend time on shows like this so he can share his experience so others can benefit. That isn't something that people just naturally do. And I want to take time to point that out. The fact that Derek recognizes that, you know what, I can be helpful. My story can be helpful, and I'm going to take the time to tell it, because if it inspires one person, then it's worth telling. So I commend him for doing that. I commend him for sharing. We spoke about a bit in this episode that, you know, I truly believe that these conversations are invaluable. And I know as a young athlete growing up and aspiring to be something and wanting to be someplace, that the more of these types of inputs I would have had, the better off I would have been. I've spoken many times that I felt that I wish I would have reached out or found or had some type of a mentor or role model that I would have been able to ask questions to and look up to. And you know what? That's not always the case for everybody. Not everybody is blessed with a mentor. But you know what? When you find content or a program or a person like this, like, you essentially have 43 mentors right now with Derek's episode on this podcast. 43 different stories about how to be great, about how to be your best and follow one of them, right? Listen, dig in. Like, I just think it is a great tool for parents and for players. So we're going to keep finding the stories. We're going to keep bringing up great guests. We're going to keep talking about all the good stuff, and hopefully make a difference for young players out there, and for older players, and for people who just want to be better, people who want to contribute. So thanks again for sticking with us. I think the theme of this is perseverance, stick-to-itiveness. Boy, Derek exemplifies that. To break through after not even really being on anyone's radar at all at 28 years old is quite an accomplishment. But he just kept getting better. He just kept going to work. He kept making the most of his opportunities. And here he is, back in the greatest league in the world. So love it. Thanks again for being here. Until next time, play hard.